everyone, my name is Taylor Nash, and today we're going to be doing a book talk on David A. Adler's book series, A Picture Book of Harriet Tubman. It's illustrated by Samuel Bird. This, you can, just by looking on the first pages, you can see how beautiful these images are, and you can already tell a lot by this book just by seeing the characters. It's about a girl who is looking at her life right in front of her, wishing that it could be something else, and how she can change it. And so I felt this book is going to be great to look and open up and read. This is basically a biography of Harriet Tubman's life, and so when we open up the pages, we're going to see different pictures of what her life was like when she was a child. And so it says, Harriet Tubman was born in 1820 on a large plantation in Dorchester County, Maryland. She lived in a small log hut in her house. She had, it was a dirt floor, 1 bedroom. She was the 6th of 11 children, and both her mother and father were owned by the slave owner Edward Brodess, and Harriet Tubman was owned by him as well. Edward Brodess was a man, he sold property, he sold apples, vegetation, lumber, and he also sold slaves to other slave owners, some slaves which included Harriet's family, her brothers and sisters, and Harriet was also she did not obey her slave master's commands, and so she was often in trouble a lot as a child, and she was afraid that she would also be sold one day. But luckily for Harriet, during this time when she was a child, abolitionists began to speak out against slavery and how it was bad, and they would protest in newspapers. And Harriet Tubman was grateful because she could learn things from people who started rebellions against slavery, such as Nat Turner. He was a young slave, and he also knew how Moses had led the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, and he was hoping that one day that he could be the people's Moses to help fight against slavery. And Harriet was so intrigued by this. She was encouraged by people fighting for what they wanted and what they believed in, to be free people, that Harriet even one time came between a slave master and a slave who was running away. He threw an iron metal weight, and it hit Harriet in the head. So you can tell how brave and just how she was willing to do anything to help the person who was trying to get away. You can tell even at a young age how brave she was. In 1844, Harriet married a man named John Tubman. He was a free man who lived back behind the slave owner's property. Harriet was thinking about running away, but her husband didn't want to join her. So she thought, and she decided that she was going to run away, that she was going to escape. And she prayed to God about what she was going to do. It says, and when she would go and come back, the slaves often sang in the fields the afternoons before Harriet ran off. And they sang, this was a message to let other slaves know that she was going and they could come with her. And it says, when the chariot comes, I'm going to leave you. I'm bound for the promised land. For Harriet Tubman, the promised land was north, where she would be free. And so they sang as she ran away, and she would come back. Harriet escaped in the night with her 3 brothers, and soon her brothers decided to go back because they were scared. And 2 nights later, Harriet went off alone, and she said, I had a right to liberty or death, and if I could not have one, I would have the other. And so you can just see how truly she is determined to beat this, to help people move across and be free, how she wants to go north and be a free woman. And it tells the rest of her story of how she came back and helped people cross into the north, and she spent her whole life doing things that are good for others. For this lesson, what I would love to do is, since we are talking about Harriet Tubman and our genre is historical fiction, speaking of this biography, I would love for students to do a mini biography report using flip books. and it would be like the who, what, when, where, why, talking about who was the person we were writing about. Of course, we would do this whole group. That way the students would understand everything, and they would be able to see what I wrote down, the important topics to write down, just because I feel like this is important information, and I feel like students would understand this better as if we went over it together. So for the who, they would write, Harriet Tubman was a slave who fought against adversity and won and became a free woman once she stepped into the state of Pennsylvania. We would talk about just important things and what they thought were important, and I would ask them questions of what they thought was the best. And so this is what we learned about today, and I hope you really enjoyed it. This is our book talk for this afternoon. Thank you.